a production of the South Carolina Educational Television Network.
We are here at Sycamore Shoals in Elizabethton, Tennessee. It is here where, in 1780, the Over-Mountain Men started their 12-day march to South Carolina to engage British troops in battle at Kings Mountain. The Battle of Kings Mountain is a very important story in the history of the American Revolution. It is important to the people of South Carolina because in 1780, the entire state, except one small portion, was completely dominated by the Tories under British officers. The only area still fighting against the Tories and the British was known as the New Acquisition, which later became York County. Groups of militia had been formed under their elected colonels, and they were doing their best to harass the forces of the dreaded British Army. Help was coming because the men across the mountains in what is now Tennessee became very irritated by the proclamation of General Patrick Ferguson, and in their own way they responded.
So this is a message from Patrick Ferguson. Lay down your arms and cease opposition to the king. I'll march my army across the mountains and lay waste your land with fire and sword. Poppycock. If he wishes a fight, then a fight he shall have.
Patrick Ferguson, an effective general with the British Army during the American Revolution. He intended to see that South Carolina, along with all other colonies in America, would return to the domination of the British government. The War of the American Revolution gave birth to our nation. Gradually, 13 British colonies became 13 American colonies. They became self-sufficient by manufacturing, processing wheat, fish, tobacco, lumber, cloth, and other goods, which they traded with foreign countries. Because of trade, the American colonies became less and less dependent on their mother country, England. New freedom and economic growth were the result of their independence. The British saw this as a threat and began to strengthen their control over the colonies economically and politically. In 1775 began the battle for independence. From Bunker Hill came the cry, the shot that was heard around the world. This war lasted for 8 years. From 1775 to 1779, many American forces fell to the British. But in 1780, the Battle of Kings Mountain marked a turning point in this revolution. In this engagement, Patrick Ferguson and his Loyalist forces were defeated by the Patriot forces. American soldiers and militiamen were thankful for this victory and grateful for the Over-Mountain Men who marched from Sycamore Shoals to Kings Mountain to aid in the fight for freedom.
Primarily the Scotch-Irish had settled on the western frontier, which this area was in the 1780s. And they were experiencing a freedom and a self-government in this area that they had never dreamed possible. And when Major Ferguson's threat came that he would destroy them, that he would destroy their land, he would destroy this freedom, then I think that challenge is more than they could even imagine, not throwing back a challenge too.
And so they wanted to stop him.
That's correct. I think that's a real reason they did it, because they were about to lose something that they'd never experienced before, and they had no intentions of giving up again.
I see. So they walked or rode horseback for, they began on September the 25th, 1780, I believe. How long was the trail and how difficult?
The trail is approximately 185 miles from the Sycamore Shoals here on the Watauga where they mustered from. If you add the distance from here to the Abingdon, Virginia area, or the men that marched from Abingdon to muster here, you're talking about probably 217, 220 miles, maybe.
Right. Was this Indian trails or were they breaking trail as they went along?
These were primarily routes that were well known. The trail from Virginia to this area was used commonly by settlers, and people were moving back and forth from this area, and the trail from here to Kings Mountain was the Bright's Trace Trail. This was a trail that settlers had used. It was originally a buffalo trail. The Indians had used it, and the settlers had used it many times in coming and going from the Carolinas, from the Tidewater area back across the mountains. So this trail that they used in going to Kings Mountain was a well-established route, known probably by most all the frontier people.
I see. But they were chasing Ferguson, so there was no intention to battle at Kings Mountain. Is that correct? They were just going to find him.
That's correct. They had no idea until they were at what we would call the South Carolina line at this point before they even knew where Major Ferguson was camped. At any point between here and there, as far as they knew when they left Sycamore Shoals, they could have encountered Ferguson's army.
The Over-Mountain men were frontiersmen, hunters, pioneers, farmers who cleared their land from virgin timber. They laid down the plowshare for the sword, literally. No uniformed army was this, but a battalion of volunteers, wearing their own clothing of homespun and buckskin, fighting as they did in their mountains. Mr. Stanberry, earlier you mentioned 2 points of military protocol that occurred here at Sycamore Shoals. Please tell me about those.
Well, it was really lack of military protocol, I think, because there was no United States Army military assistance of any kind. This was something the men decided to do on their own. They furnished their own equipment and decided to attack Ferguson rather than let him get into this part of the country and cause damage to the families.
I believe there was a roll call of men from Happy Valley, a part of this county a little to the south of us. Would you tell me the story about that?
Yes, it's in this county, and every able-bodied man showed up ready to go to Kings Mountain, and they made every 8th man fall out and go back home just to protect the families from Indians.
Would this be the first military draft in what is now the United States?
As far as I know, it was, and it was the fact that it was in reverse was different than any draft we've seen since.
The men mustered here at Sycamore Shoals. What path did they follow to arrive at Kings Mountain?
Well, generally they went over 3 ranges of mountains. First they went over Yellow Mountain, which was the highest altitude they went over, around 4,800 feet. And then they went over the Blue Ridge and dropped down into another valley, and then over Linville Mountain. And when they hit the flats over Linville Mountain, it was pretty flat traveling the rest of the way to Kings Mountain.
I noticed that they made this entire trek of over 100 miles in 10 days, is that correct?
12 days from Sycamore Shoals, although one of the days they didn't travel at all. There were no wagons. As far as we know, there were no tents. Each man had his own bedroll, and they found what shelter they could all the way across. Overhanging rocks.
The trees, the large rocks?
The trees, the rocks would be the main thing. Other than any rock they could get under, there really was not much shelter.
On September the 26th, 1780, under the leadership of their elected officers, John Sevier, Isaac Shelby, and William Campbell of Virginia, the Over-Mountain men left Sycamore Shoals, Tennessee, and began a 150-mile trek over some of the most difficult mountain terrain in the Appalachians. They encountered snow, icy mountain streams, slippery rocks that cut through their shoes and moccasins as they traversed muddy mountain paths. They had one hot meal a day and followed it with scant hours of sleep under overhanging rocks, in hollow trees, or under whatever shelter could be found. Along the way, they were joined by troops from North Carolina under their elected colonels, McDowell, Winston, Chronicle, and others. Through high mountain passes and narrow valleys, they came to protect their freedom in a forced march that continued for 12 weary days. Mountains are strong, enduring, challenging, but so were the mountain men who were determined to trap Major Patrick Ferguson in October of 1780 and end the threat to their homes and their families. Crossing into South Carolina, they were joined by troops under the command of Colonels Lacey, Hill, and Williams. Through a cold and rainy night, they silently advanced eastward toward their long-awaited encounter with Major Patrick Ferguson. So from the frontier of what is now Southwest Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, came the over-mountain men trying to capture the position of Patrick Ferguson. Scouts had gone ahead to inform the militia from South Carolina that they were on the march, and information came to all of the men that Ferguson had made an encampment on the highest point of the area, what is now known as Kings Mountain. The Patriot scouts were very clever in discovering information. Prior to the battle, 2 scouts intercepted a black servant who was taking Ferguson his breakfast. They relieved the servant of the basket of food. The servant cheerfully returned to his quarters, and the scouts, for the first time in many days, enjoyed a good hot meal, and Major Ferguson went hungry. In chasing him, the Patriots had faced a night of rain. They had not stopped for food, and it was a very grim and determined group of men who encircled Kings Mountain on that day of October the 7th, 1780. I have a map here explaining the deployment of troops. The over-mountain men, Shelby, Sevier, Camel, were in this general area. The South Carolina militia joined the troops under Cleveland, Lacey, and Hawthorne, and Chronicle in the northeast area. Finally, everything was ready. Ferguson knew that they were there. He drew up by blowing his silver whistle, his British and Tory troops in the regular line of straight lines with bayonets pointed, but the opposition, the Patriots, fought the guerrilla fight hiding behind trees and rocks and whatever cover they could find.
I think this is something that's not often mentioned or brought out about the Battle of Kings Mountain, was the unorthodox way that it was fought compared to the other battles, that most of the general battles, I'll say, that was fought during the Revolution, especially on the part of the enemies of Ferguson. Because Major Ferguson, as you say, he had a group of hand-picked and hand-trained Tories that were trained in the fashion of the British Army. They were trained and disciplined like the British Army, like the regulars, the redcoats that were sent over here. But on the other hand, they were being attacked by these backwoods riflemen, which, as I said earlier, primarily their main training had been against Indians and skirmishes.
With many shrieks and shouts and much musketry, the battle began.
Colonel Sevier made a statement at this point. He made the statement just before it started. He said, "When the battle starts, boys, each one of you is your own general." He knew that these men were expert at fighting in the woods. He knew that there was no reason to try to command them or tell them anything once it started.
Colonel Edward Lacey of South Carolina yelled the command for the battle to begin. He was accorded this honor by Colonel Campbell because he had organized the South Carolina regiments and had been the first to give Colonel Campbell the exact location of Ferguson's encampment. It was a very bloody battle. Sometimes the Patriots had to rush up mountainsides equal 100 feet, others 200 according to the lay of the land that they were deployed about.
They surrounded the hill, and when they opened fire on the British, of course the British reverted to their standing linear tactic of firing volleys just like a machine, one volley right after another. But In this case, these men were behind trees, behind rocks, behind any cover they could find.
In a highly vulnerable position, Ferguson's men were easily shot down by the Patriot forces. The Tory troops encircled the top of Kings Mountain, and from the lower slopes, the mountain men could see them framed against the October sky. The battle tactics employed by the Patriots and their excellent marksmanship with a frontier rifle gave them an added advantage.
The American Revolution was fought with a smoothbore musket. That was a standard military weapon of that day. Rifles were used, by and large, very few times in the American Revolution. But at Kings Mountain, practically all of the men from the backwoods were carrying rifles because they were hunters and frontiersmen rather than regular soldiers or even regular militia.
The battle was a bloody but brief affair that lasted 1 hour and 5 minutes. Though the Tories attempted to surrender a number of times, Major Patrick Ferguson refused to accept defeat, and the end came only after he was shot.
He was trying to muster his men, you see, as Tories had attempted to surrender several times. Some of them had even tied bandanas to their bayonets on their musket, and Ferguson would ride along and kick the musket from their hands. He would not tolerate defeat, and he ran to the end of the hill and spun his horse around, blowing a silver officer's whistle to rally his men, and he fell from the saddle with approximately 7 rifle bullets in his body when he fell. They removed him, and they removed him from the saddle, where he had fallen part of the way with one foot caught in a stirrup, propped him against a tree, and there Major Ferguson expired. And the rest of his men stacked their weapons, put their hands on their head, and surrendered to the Patriot backwoodsmen.
After the battle was over, the area was covered with the dead and the wounded. There was a doctor with the Tory troops, and he remembered his Hippocratic oath as being more important than political commitments, and he tended the wounded on both the Patriot and the Loyalist or Tory side. There was a man from the frontier, a Mr. John Moore, who unfortunately was so wounded that a leg had to be amputated. The people of the area came to help the wounded, and Mr. Moore was taken to a home of a nearby farmer. When the Overmountain men went back, Mrs. Moore was informed that her husband was wounded but still lived. So on horseback, she came to this area, found him, bought a wagon, took him home, nursed him back to health, and Mr. Moore lived to be a very elderly gentleman. Nearby on a farm lived the McDowells, and a Mrs. McDowell and her daughter were known to come to the battlefield to help the wounded, to bring water and whatever foodstuffs they could, so that the men of the Patriot forces could recoup themselves and begin the long march home. Ferguson was found at the top of Kings Mountain with 7 bullet holes in him. He had worn a checked hunting shirt over his uniform, and records say that at the very end, on his white horse, he was left-handed, so his sword was in his left hand. He led a charge down the mountain, and in this charge he was killed. It's not known to this day whether he was trying to escape or to lead his troops in that general area. However, after the white flags went up and the bullets stopped, Ferguson and almost all of the Loyalist troops had been wounded or killed. After his death, Ferguson's silver whistle, his watch, and pieces of his clothing were taken as souvenirs by the men of the Patriot Army as a small memento of that terrible, terrible day. We are here at the grave of Colonel Patrick Ferguson. By the cairn, which covers the mass grave, it's covered with rocks, a suitable monument to a gentleman born in Scotland. In front of it is a beautiful stone monument in his honor, which calls him a gentleman of military distinction and of honor. And indeed he was. He was a good servant of the Crown, had served in many military campaigns, but unfortunately he was an unhappy man. He felt that he had been passed over in rank by others who were not as competent as he, and it is recorded that he was thoroughly disgusted with his Tory troops, feeling they weren't as well disciplined and as well trained as the regular British troops. During his lifetime, he did many interesting things. he invented the Ferguson breech-loading rifle, which was very important as a military instrument. Here at the Battle of Kings Mountain, on the crest of the hill, there were 3 women within the British encampment: Virginia Sal, Virginia Paul, and a woman from Burke County. Virginia Sal had accompanied Ferguson on his latter campaigns, and she was killed during the battle. She was buried in the common grave with Ferguson and his men. It's recorded that Virginia Paul, the day after the battle, went around the encampment singing and doing her work as if nothing untoward had happened the day before. The woman from Burke County had a very sharp tongue, and as Ferguson and his men passed her home, she let them know exactly what she thought of them and of the British and Tory forces. In order to hush her up, they simply kidnapped her and brought her along so that she would also help with the work around the camp. After the battle was over, she returned to her home in Burke County, and we hope had a very long and happy life. Now, not far from here, in this general direction, the volunteer militia of South Carolina, men from York and Chester County, were deployed under their colonels, Lacey, Hill, and Williams. And in this general direction was a detachment of men from the South Fork of the Catawba River in Lincoln County under Major William Chronicle. Chronicle was a very dashing officer. His men adored him. They would have followed him anywhere. They fought brilliantly in this engagement, but unfortunately, Chronicle was killed, one of the few fatalities among the Patriot forces. He was buried here on Kings Mountain. He was 25 years old. The colonels of the South Carolina militia are very interesting men. Edward Lacey, born in Pennsylvania, ran away from home and joined the Army when he was 13 years old. His father went after him, brought him back. But at 16, he and a friend again ran away from home, came to Chester, where he bound himself to a bricklayer and received a very good English education. He was married 1776, and he and his wife made a home 6 miles west of Chester. He was a brilliant leader. He fought in every campaign of the Patriot forces, and we find him a magnificent leader here at Kings Mountain. William Hill was an iron master whose ironworks of foundry and forge were not far from here. He made articles for the farm and for the home, as well as casting cannon and cannonball. Unfortunately, when the British came through under Christian Hook, everything he was possessed of was burned by the British. But that didn't stop him. He kept fighting in every campaign. He was wounded in his sword and rifle arm in the Battle of Hanging Rock. And so, unfortunately, with his arm in a sling, he was not able to participate personally in the Battle of Kings Mountain, although his leadership was very, very apparent. James Williams, interesting gentleman from 96, a very peaceful farmer whose area saw the first blood of the Revolution in South Carolina. He and his wife, with a wagon and a few possessions, had to flee for their lives. And unfortunately, Williams never forgot the burning, the theft, the terrible moments when the British came through 96. This must have influenced his desire to send men, horses, material back to that area, because through some of his ideas, he and Lacey never liked each other. When the Battle of Kings Mountain was approaching, Lacey and Hill had assumed leadership of Sumter's army. Williams had been made a brigadier general in North Carolina by Governor Rutledge of South Carolina and insisted that he be the leader. However, the men would not follow him. So Williams, in a huff, led a small group of men near here and encamped alone. Hill realized that they needed organization. So he and Lacey invited 2 groups of North Carolinians to join them, and then Lacey went to the encampment of the Over Mountain men. On the way, he was captured as a spy, blindfolded, taken to their camp, where he had to prove that he was a loyal patriot. He was able to give them the precise location of Patrick Ferguson so that they were able to come together at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Unfortunately, Williams was shot just as Ferguson died and as the first flags went up for the surrender. And Williams, saying, "For God's sake, boys, don't give up the hill," realized before his death that the battle had been won. In our history books, this battle is considered to be the turning point of the American Revolution. But the men who fought here didn't know that. Our South Carolina colonels, a bricklayer, an iron master, and a farmer, all wanted to go home, look after their businesses, tend to their property, care and protect their families. The over-mountain men were needed again in the Watauga settlements. These were men who were not paid. They were cold, they wore their own clothing, they were volunteers, but they came together here because the British must be defeated in order to preserve a few simple words: freedom, liberty, democracy. We take these words for granted, but here at Kings Mountain, they were fought for and won.